This is the Open Doors Monument. This monument is located in Israel. This monument wasn't just built as a means to help diplomatic ties with Israel and the Philippines, but this monument has somewhat a deeper historical background on what happened during 1930. And today I'm going to discuss it with you. When we think of World War II, we often think of the horrors of war. Guns, battles, tanks, bombs, cities destroyed to the ground, enemies, allies, genocide. And when it comes to the Philippines during World War II, we often think of Japanese, the Bataan Death March, or the Battle of Manila. But there's a specific story, a historical event during World War II in which I found it interesting, and in this video, I'm going to show it to you. This is a video on how the Philippines saved 1,000 Jews. But before we get into how the Philippines saved 1,000 Jews, we need first to understand Germany. This is Germany during the 1930s. Germany had a political party rising in the government at the time. We all might know it as the Nazi Party. And the Nazi Party has its leader Adolf Hitler. And Adolf Hitler had ambitious ideas to help improve the country. Adolf Hitler's mindset is that he wants to bring back Germany's pride. And the reason is because Germany lost the First World War. Okay, let's go back in time during World War I. Germany just lost a lot of its territory as part of the Treaty of Versailles and has to pay compensation and damages for the war they inflicted on. Because Germany lost the war and have to pay the damages, Germany's economy declined tremendously. And what was worse was there was a Great Depression during at the time. And in addition with the Great Depression was the Spanish flu during 1918. So yeah, Germany was, well, not in a good place that time. Anyways, Adolf Hitler had ambitious ideas to bring back Germany's pride in the world stage. He rose to the ranks of the Nazi Party and eventually became the Nazi Party's leader. And during an election in Germany, Adolf Hitler eventually became the chancellor. Now, because he became chancellor, he had more power to bring his goals into motion. And during the 1930s, Adolf Hitler eventually gained emergency powers in Germany. And this is where it starts. So in 1935, just years before World War II would begin, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party signed the Nuremberg Law. If you don't know what's the Nuremberg Law, this is the brief definition of it. Its duty was to strip the rights of the Jews. That's it. Adolf Hitler had a belief in which the Jews were responsible for the decline in Germany. So when he signed the Nuremberg Law, it had actually just one goal: to strip the rights of every Jew in the country. So according to the Nuremberg Law, people with any single grandparent that was Jewish is considered a Jew. So for an example, if my grandparent or just one of my grandparents was a Jew, I am technically a Jew according to the Nuremberg Law. In addition to that, the Nuremberg Law stripped the rights of every Jew to vote, to hold public office, and to marry any pure Aryan race German. And along with the Nuremberg Law, Jews were carrying passports with a big swastika on it and a big J inked in red to signify that they're Jews. So yeah, that was technically the goal of the Nuremberg Law and would become a foundation of what's to come to every Jewish person in Germany at the time. So just 3 years after the Nuremberg Law was signed, in 1938, Adolf Hitler initiated Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. This was the night in which Adolf Hitler initiated his troops to raid any Jewish establishment. It could have been homes, businesses, schools, synagogues, anything related to Jews. It got its name Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, because during that night, German streets were filled with these broken glass that were destroyed by the Nazi soldiers. And this was the start of something darker that was about to come in Europe. It defied human rights and eventually was known as the Holocaust. So let's go back on how the Philippines saved 1,000 Jews during World War II. So it's the early 1930s and the Philippines just got its semi-independence from the United States, which at the time was a US colony. Because it gained semi-independence, the Philippines also gained a new president, Manuel Quezon. So Manuel Quezon was a charismatic president. He loved his country, he loves his people, and he loves to play poker. So during a night of poker, President Manuel Quezon, along with US High Commissioner McNutt, the then Colonel Eisenhower, and businessmen Philip and Alex Frieder, they received a telegram in which Jews were seeking refuge. And during this discussion, there were Jews fleeing across Asia in the means of escaping the Japanese occupation. And during this time, there were about 25 Jews that arrived in Manila to seek refuge away from the Japanese. But this was just the start of something more challenging. This is the MS St. Louis. What made this ship popular were its passengers at the time. The MS St. Louis was carrying about 1,000 Jews at the time in the means to escape Europe. The ship was bound to Cuba as a means to escape the Holocaust that was happening across Europe. But once the ship arrived in Cuba, it was denied access to its port. So the captain again decided to go to Florida or the United States, and then the United States just said no. We're not going to accept any refugees. So the ship again tried to seek refuge to Canada, but the Canadian government at the time was like, yeah, we're not going to accept you. So with no hope, the ship was bound to Germany. So once the ship arrives in German soils, every Jewish passenger would be taken to any concentration camp and would be then experimented on and killed or tortured. But before the ship was about to set sail to Germany, in a decisive decision, President Manuel Quezon just decided that the Philippines is open to any Jewish refugee. So thankfully, the MS St. Louis was bound to the Philippines as a means to seek refuge away from the Nazi Party. What's more ironic is that the MS St. Louis was a German ship, and what was ironic again was that the ambassador that helped the ship arrive in the Philippines was a German ambassador. So once the ship arrived in the Philippines, there were about 1,200 documented Jews in the country. But these refugees were not just refugees. Thanks to the help of Manuel Quezon, US High Commissioner McNutt, and Philip and Alex Frieder, these refugees had a new life in the country. They were given jobs thanks to Alex and Philip Frieder, who were also businessmen in the country, and were also given new visas. These refugees were given new jobs, new homes, and a new life in the country. But as the country was about to prepare for the brink of war, the Japanese bombarded Pearl Harbor and eventually invaded the country. As the Japanese occupied the country, prisoners of war, especially Filipino and American, were treated quite harshly. They would be tortured, captured, or eventually killed. But the refugees were treated quite fairly. The reason for this was that the refugees carried their old passport. And this passport had the German or the Nazi swastika on it. And as the Japanese saw the passports, they deemed these refugees allies because at the time, Japan and Germany were allies at the war. But there were also refugees that resisted the Japanese and eventually met the same fate as any prisoner of war. But as the Japanese surrendered in 1945 and the Filipino and American soldiers liberated the country, there were refugees that went back to Europe and lived on their lives. But there were also Jews that stayed here in the country. The reason for it is that because they started a new life here. They had a family, they had a job, and eventually they stayed here. And until now, the Jewish community has expressed their gratitude to the Filipino government. And to this day, Filipinos and Jews coexist here in our country. And in 2009, this monument was made in honor of Manuel Quezon's actions during World War II. And this monument was named Open Doors, to commemorate Manuel Quezon's actions to help the needy. These events eventually inspired the film Quezon's Game. And in that film, it showed how Manuel Quezon had to decide on what to do during that time of crisis. It's a very nice film and I recommend you watch it. And the facts and the stories I've told you was also taken from a documentary about the same events, which was called Rescue in the Philippines. I suggest you watch the film and the documentary if you want to know more of this story on how the Philippines rescued 1,000 Jews, and I guarantee you'll enjoy it. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you've learned at least something today. And if you want to learn more about the story on how Manuel Quezon saved thousands of Jews, I suggest you watch the film and the documentary if you want to learn more. And if I've missed a few details, leave a comment. Again, thank you so much for watching this video. You can subscribe to my channel and get notified when I upload another video. Again, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again on my next video.